The road narrowed as the trees grew thicker, the pines leaning close as if to whisper over the roof of the car. Laura Whitman drove slowly, her fingers tight on the steering wheel. The headlights cut through the fog, tracing the thin ribbon of asphalt that twisted toward the campgrounds by Birch Hollow River. In the passenger seat, Mark reached back to hand their daughter a pack of trail mix. "You okay, sweetheart?" "Yeah," Emma said, muffled through her hoodie. She was 13, quiet, and already bored. From the back seat, Jacob, their 7-year-old, was glued to the window. "Are we there yet?" "Almost," Laura said. She glanced at Mark, smiling faintly. "You sure this is the right turnoff?" "Yep, Birch Hollow Campground. Dad used to bring me here all the time. The GPS lost signal 10 minutes ago." They were deep in northern Massachusetts, the kind of place where cell service died and the woods swallowed sound. The weekend was supposed to be simple. A family camping trip, no phones, no distractions. Just them. The trees opened briefly, revealing a clearing with an old sign half collapsed in weeds. The faded letters still read, "Birch Hollow Campground, Esterier 1962 mark, parked near a decaying ranger station." The door hung open, creaking faintly in the wind. "Cozy," Laura muttered. Mark grinned. "Adds to the adventure." They unpacked the car. Tents, cooler, sleeping bags. The air was damp and smelled like pine and river silt. Somewhere beyond the trees, water murmured. Jacob ran ahead, chasing a flicker of light through the branches. "Jake, stay where we can see you," Laura called, but he was gone before she finished. Mark sighed. "I'll get him." Laura watched her husband disappear into the trees, flashlight beam bouncing like a pulse. The woods seemed to close behind him. The fog thickened, carrying the faint sound of rushing water. By the time Mark returned with Jacob in tow, twilight had fallen. "Found him at the river," Mark said, catching his breath. "He said he saw someone there." Laura frowned. "Someone?" Jacob nodded seriously. "A boy. He waved at me." Mark ruffled his hair. "Probably just your reflection, buddy." Jacob didn't answer. He kept looking back toward the dark line of trees. Later that night, the family sat around the campfire. Crickets sang in the grass, and the river whispered beyond the ridge. Laura felt her body finally begin to relax. The stars blinked above them, faint behind drifting clouds. "Okay," Mark said, passing around marshmallows. "Ghost story time." "Really?" Laura said, smiling. "Yeah, why not? Classic camping tradition." Emma rolled her eyes. "Dad, you're such a dork," Mark grinned. "All right, fine. I'll keep it PG-13, so legend says there's a river near here that takes people. Not just drowning takes them." Jacob's eyes widened. "Takes them where?" Mark lowered his voice. "Nobody knows. Fishermen say they see faces under the surface. They say the water's alive." "Okay, that's enough," Laura said, half laughing, half uneasy. Mark winked at her. "I'm kidding, babe. Mostly." But as the wind shifted, Laura thought she heard something, like a splash from far off. When she turned her head, the forest was perfectly still. That night, she woke to silence. The fire had burned down to coals. Her tent was dark except for the faint green glow of Mark's watch. He was asleep beside her, breathing slow and even. Outside, she heard a faint sound, splashing. She sat up. "Mark," she whispered. He stirred. "What? Do you hear that?" He listened. The sound came again, soft but rhythmic, like footsteps in shallow water. Mark sighed. Probably a deer, but Laura couldn't shake the unease crawling up her spine. She slipped on her jacket and stepped outside. The cold hit her immediately, thick with fog. The campsite looked different, distorted by mist and moonlight. She heard the splash again. Then Jacob's voice. "Mom?" Her heart jumped. "Jacob?" She turned toward the sound, flashlight trembling in her hand. A figure stood at the edge of the trees. Small, barefoot, dripping wet. "Jacob, what are you doing?" He turned, and she froze. The boy's face looked like Jacob's, but it wasn't. The eyes were wrong. completely black, reflecting the beam like glass. Water dripped from his hair onto the leaves. His lips moved, whispering something she couldn't hear. Then he smiled. Laura stumbled back, flashlight falling. The beam spun across the ground, catching a glint of something wet. Footprints leading toward the river. She grabbed the light, aimed it up, but the figure was gone. Morning came pale and gray. The woods smelled of smoke and damp earth. Mark was already awake, standing near the riverbank. "You okay?" he asked. "You were tossing in your sleep." Laura hesitated. "Did you go down there last night?" "No. Why?" She told him what she'd seen, her voice unsteady. He frowned. "You must have dreamed it. Jacob was in the tent all night, but when they looked, Jacob was gone." Panic hit fast. They tore through the campsite, calling his name. Emma cried, voice cracking. Mark ran into the woods, shouting until his voice went raw. Then Laura saw it, a trail of small footprints pressed into the wet soil, leading toward the riverbank. The last print stopped at the edge of the water. She screamed for Mark. He came running, dove into the river without hesitation. The water was black and cold. He disappeared under the surface, bubbles breaking where he'd gone in. Seconds passed. Then Jacob's head broke through the current, gasping. "Jacob!" Laura waded forward, grabbing him. "Oh, thank God!" But as her arms wrapped around him, she felt something wrong. His skin was icy, too smooth, almost rubbery. Her palms began to sting. She yanked her hands back with a cry. Her skin was red, blistered, as if burned. The boy looked up at her. His face was pale, his eyes blank. "Mom," he said in a voice that wasn't Jacob's. Behind him, the river churned violently. Mark never surfaced. Laura screamed until her throat tore. Emma clung to her, sobbing. The boy just stood there in the shallows, watching them, head slightly tilted, like a curious animal. Then, slowly, he smiled. An awful, perfect imitation of Jacob's grin. The river grew calm again, as if nothing had happened. That night, rain started. Laura drove through the storm, Jacob sitting silent in the back seat, still dripping though hours had passed. Emma cried quietly beside her. "Where's Dad?" Emma whispered. Laura didn't answer. She could barely keep the car on the narrow, winding road. In the rearview mirror, Jacob was staring straight ahead, unblinking. When lightning flashed, she saw his reflection in the glass, and behind him, for just an instant, a shadow like a man made of water. Standing in the back seat, hand resting on the boy's shoulder, Laura screamed. The car swerved, tires skidding on the wet road. When she looked again, the shadow was gone, but Jacob was smiling. Rain drummed against the windshield as Laura's Subaru crawled down the mountain road. The wipers beat a steady rhythm, thump, 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 but the glass fogged faster than the blades could clear it. Jacob sat motionless in the back seat. His clothes were still damp. Every few minutes, the smell of river water drifted forward, a sour metallic scent that made Laura's stomach turn. Emma stared out her window, silent, wrapped in a blanket. "Mom," she whispered, "are we going back to the police?" Laura swallowed hard. "We will. I just need a phone signal." The storm had knocked out every bar of reception. Even the dashboard radio hissed with static. She drove past an abandoned gas station, its sign swinging in the wind. The headlights caught movement, something crouched by the pumps, pale and glistening. But when she blinked, it was gone. Jacob's voice came quietly. "Mom, you're going the wrong way." Her hands tightened on the wheel. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer. He just turned his head toward the window, watching the dark blur of trees slide past. "Jacob, honey, Dad's waiting," he said. By the river, Laura slammed the brakes. The car fishtailed to a stop. Emma gasped. Laura turned in her seat. "Jacob, look at me," he did. Water trickled from his hair, though the heater blasted warm air. His skin gleamed faintly, as if the rain outside had soaked through him instead of drying off. Where did you hear that? She demanded. He tilted his head. He told me, Emma whimpered. Mom, please. Laura forced a shaky breath. It's okay. It's just, he's tired, that's all. We're all tired. She pressed the gas again. The tires spun, then caught the wet asphalt. The forest swallowed the road ahead, black and endless. 15 minutes later, a glow appeared through the rain. A diner, old square, half the neon letters burned out so the sign read only "Eat." Laura pulled in, gravel crunching under the tires. The place looked almost deserted except for a pickup truck parked out front. Inside, warm light spilled from behind steamed windows. She exhaled shakily. Okay, she said, voice trembling with relief. Let's get dry, get help. She turned to Jacob. He was gone. The back seat was empty, just water pooled on the upholstery. Jacob. She threw open the door, stepping into the downpour. Jacob. Rain pelted her face. She spun in circles, scanning the lot, the trees, the road behind them. Then she saw him, standing in the field across the road, ankle deep in water, staring toward the woods. Jacob! She screamed. Get over here! He didn't move. She ran toward him, splashing through puddles. Jacob, please, when she reached him. She grabbed his shoulders and turned him around. The face that looked back at her was Jacob's, but his eyes were filled with tiny ripples, like something moving beneath the surface. Mom, he said softly. You came back, her breath caught. Jacob. What lightning cracked above them. For an instant the world turned white, and in that flash, she saw the river behind him where no river should have been. Water spreading across the field, rising silently, reflecting the storm. Then the light vanished. The field was empty again. Jacob blinked, confused. Mom, what's wrong? Laura stepped back, heart hammering. Get in the car, she whispered. Now. Inside the diner, a bell jingled as they entered. Warm air hit them like a wall, carrying the smell of coffee and fried food. A woman behind the counter looked up, a heavy-set lady in her 50s with sharp eyes. Her name tag read, Marge. Lord Almighty, she said. You folks look like you've seen a ghost. Laura tried to smile, but couldn't. Car trouble. And, my husband's missing. We need to call the police. Marge nodded toward a payphone by the restrooms. Go ahead, sweetheart. Laura hurried over, fishing for coins. Emma slid into a booth, shivering. Jacob sat across from her, staring out the window. The line on the payphone was dead. Laura's hand trembled as she hung it up. Of course, she muttered. Of course it's dead. Storm's been killing the line since last night, Marge said, pouring coffee. You said your husband's missing? Laura nodded, tears welling up. He fell in the river. I couldn't... Before she could finish, a door opened at the back of the diner. A man in a deputy's jacket stepped out, rubbing his eyes. Somebody say missing person? Marge waved him over. Halverson, this lady needs help. The deputy approached, notebook already in hand. Evening, ma'am. You said your husband went into the river? Laura nodded. Yes, Birch Hollow. He jumped in to save our son. We found Jacob, but... She stopped, glancing toward the booth. The deputy followed her gaze. That your boy? Yes. He studied Jacob for a moment, frowning slightly. He looks pale. You should get him checked out soon. Laura nodded, hugging herself. Please, just find my husband. Halverson scribbled notes. Birch Hollow, huh? Haven't heard that name in a while. He paused. You sure that's where it happened? Laura blinked. Yes, why? The deputy exhaled slowly. That stretch of river's been off limits for years. Dam broke back in the 70s. Flooded the old mill town. Locals say it's cursed, Marge snorted. Folks around here'll say anything's cursed. Halverson shrugged. Maybe, but we still find things wash up sometimes. Things that don't belong to nobody. Laura's stomach twisted. What kind of things? He didn't answer right away. He just looked at Jacob again, thoughtful, uneasy. Jacob turned his head toward the window. Rain streaked the glass. Outside, in the reflection of the neon light, a shape moved. Tall, dark, human-like, but rippling, as if made of water. He smiled faintly. "Dad," he whispered. The diner lights flickered as thunder rolled across the valley. Deputy Halverson turned toward the window, uneasy. "You folks can stay here tonight. Roads will be washed out till morning." Laura gripped the table edge. "No, I can't stay here. We need to look for Mark." The deputy hesitated. "If the river's still rising, search crews will go out at first light. Until then, you'll just get lost out there." Jacob stirred. "We should go now." Halverson looked at him. "Son, it's not safe out there." Jacob's voice came soft, flat. "He's calling." The sound of rain deepened, a low hiss against the glass. Halverson and Marge exchanged a quick glance. Laura forced a smile. "He's exhausted. It's been a long night." She reached across the table, but Jacob pulled his hand away. "Mom," he whispered. "You don't hear him?" Her throat tightened. "No, baby, I don't." He turned back to the window, eyes reflecting the blur of headlights from a passing truck. For a moment his reflection didn't move with him. It stayed, staring straight ahead, mouth opening in a silent word. Halverson poured coffee into a paper cup and slid it toward Laura. "You should drink something warm." Laura wrapped her hands around the cup, trembling. "What did you mean, things that wash up?" The deputy leaned against the counter. "Last spring we pulled a boat out from the North Bend. The hull was crushed, wood splintered like it had gone through a grinder. Only there's no dam anymore. Nothing up there to do that." He paused. "Couple months later, a kid went missing fishing off the rocks. His gear turned up 20 miles downstream. The rope looked burned." "Burned?" she echoed. "Like acid," he said quietly. "River's not what it used to be." Thunder cracked again, closer this time. The neon eat sign buzzed and went dark. In the dim light, Jacob slid out of the booth. "Jacob, sit down," Laura said. He kept walking toward the door. "Kid." Halvorsen called, but Jacob didn't stop. He pushed through the door into the rain. Laura jumped up. "Jacob!" Halvorsen followed her outside. Wind whipped through the parking lot, scattering puddles like silver glass. The boy stood in the middle of the road, staring down the hill toward the woods. "Jacob!" Laura grabbed his arm, but his skin felt slick and cold again, the way it had by the river. "Please, honey, don't... Can't you hear him?" Jacob whispered. "He's right there!" Lightning flashed. For an instant, Laura saw the outline of a man standing at the far edge of the road, dripping, half-transparent, face turned toward them. "Mark." Her breath caught. "Mark?" The figure raised a hand. Then the light vanished, and he was gone. Halvorsen swore under his breath. "Get back inside now!" But Jacob tore free and ran into the darkness. They chased him through the trees, branches clawing at their clothes. The storm muffled everything. Even their shouts vanished under the roar of the wind. "Jacob!" Laura's voice cracked. "Please!" She saw a faint glow ahead, the river shimmering with reflected lightning. Jacob stood at the bank, arms spread, like he was waiting to be embraced. Laura grabbed him from behind, pulling him away. "Don't do this. We'll find your father, I promise." He twisted in her arms, his face blank, eyes rippling again. "You don't have to find him. He's found us." The current swelled, reaching up the muddy bank like a hand. Halvorsen stepped forward, gun drawn, though he clearly didn't know why. The water exploded upward. A shape surged out, a whirl of limbs and river weed, fragments of clothing swirling inside translucent flesh. The smell of rot hit them like a wave. Halvorsen fired once. The bullet passed through the thing without slowing. The air shimmered where it hit like a stone dropped in a pond. "Go!" he yelled. Laura dragged Jacob back, stumbling through the trees. The deputy fired again and again, backing toward the hill. The creature lunged, a surge of water swallowing the beam of his flashlight. His scream cut short, muffled under the roar of the river. Then silence. Only rain. Laura collapsed behind a fallen log, clutching Jacob to her chest. Her hands were shaking so badly she barely felt the bark cutting her palms. Emma's voice called faintly from up the road. "Mom!" Laura looked up. Her daughter stood on the slope, flashlight trembling in her hand. "Mom, what happened?" "Don't come down!" Laura shouted. "Stay there!" Jacob looked up at her, his face streaked with rain and tears. Or maybe not rain. "He's angry," he said. "You shouldn't have run." "Stop it," she whispered. "Stop talking like that." He said the water was hungry. Laura's stomach turned cold. She pulled him to his feet, pushing him toward the road. "Go to your sister, run." He hesitated. "But go," he ran. Laura followed, slipping in the mud, every step heavier than the last. Behind her, the river hissed, whispering her name in Mark's voice. "Laura." She didn't look back. They reached the diner just as the storm began to fade. Marge stood in the doorway, face pale. "Where's the deputy?" Laura couldn't answer. She just kept walking past her, children in tow, drenched, trembling. Inside, the fluorescent lights flickered back on. Steam rose from their clothes. Marge locked the door behind them. "Honey," she whispered, "what did you see out there?" Laura turned toward the window. The reflection showed the three of them standing side by side, except in the glass. A fourth figure stood behind them, tall and dripping, hand resting on Jacob's shoulder. Lightning flashed one last time. The glass shattered. Dawn came colorless. The storm had passed, but the air hung thick and gray, every sound dampened as if wrapped in cloth. Inside the diner, shattered glass lay glittering across the tiles. Coffee cooled in overturned mugs. Laura sat in a booth with Emma pressed against her shoulder and Jacob staring blankly at the far wall. Outside, water pooled across the parking lot. The yellow stripes were gone, blurred beneath a thin film of moving current that trailed downhill toward the trees. Marge's voice broke the silence. "The bridge is out," she said, standing near the door with a portable radio crackling in her hands. "County crews say the river jumped its banks sometime before sunrise." "Whole valley's flooding." Laura looked up slowly. "Jumped its banks?" Marge nodded. "Never seen it this high. They're saying stay put till choppers start runs." Emma shivered. "What about Dad?" Laura couldn't answer. She rubbed her burned palms together, skin raw and throbbing. Every so often she thought she heard the faint lap of water against glass, though they were 20 feet above the ground. Jacob whispered, "It's coming." Marge frowned. "What's that, honey?" Jacob didn't blink. He said the river's hungry again. By late morning, the fog had thickened back into mist. The radio died. The power flickered once, twice, then stayed off. Laura stepped outside, flashlight in hand. The air smelled metallic, like wet coins. The road beyond the diner had turned into a slow-moving stream, carrying branches, cans, and, just once, something pale that might have been a hand until it sank. She stumbled back inside. "We can't stay here." Marge shook her head. "Honey, you step out there, that current'll take you." "Then we head uphill," Laura said. "There's an old motel back toward Millbridge." "It's higher ground." Jacob's voice came again, almost dreamy. "It's higher, but it's closer." "Closer to what?" Laura snapped. He looked at her with those black-tinted eyes. "To where he's waiting." Emma began to cry softly. Marge crossed herself and muttered, "Lord help us." Laura grabbed her daughter's hand. "We're leaving now." They pushed through the diner door. The water was ankle-deep and cold, swirling around their boots. The sound of rushing grew louder, a dull, endless heartbeat rolling through the valley. Halfway to the road, Jacob stopped. "Jacob." He pointed toward the trees. "He's calling me." The fog shifted, revealing dark shapes half-submerged along the tree line. Human shapes, shoulders and heads breaking the surface. Dozens of them standing perfectly still. Laura froze.
Oh, God.
The figures swayed slightly like reeds in current. One of them lifted its head. The face was almost featureless, washed smooth, eyes hollowed pits. Another raised an arm, dripping. Marge screamed, stumbling backward.
Back inside! Now! They ran!
The diner door slammed behind them, echoing like a gunshot. Outside, the water kept rising. The figures drifted closer until their shapes blurred into the gray. Inside, Laura dragged a table against the door. "We'll wait for it to stop," she panted. "It can't keep rising forever." Marge sank onto a stool, shaking. "You don't understand. That's the riverbed out there. We're standing where it wants to be." Laura turned to the window. Through the mist, she saw the parking lot swallowed entirely. The pickup truck floated sideways, bumping gently against the diner's side wall. Jacob moved to the glass, pressing his hand against it. "He says he's sorry," he whispered. "He didn't mean to take Dad." "Stop it," Laura said sharply. "Don't listen." "He says you'll see," Jacob continued. "When the water reaches the roof." The lights flickered again, dimming to a red glow from the emergency sign. The hum of the refrigerator died. Outside, a low roar built, steady and deep, until the diner trembled on its foundations. The river had found them. The floor trembled beneath them. Somewhere beneath the diner, the foundation groaned, deep, muffled, like something breathing under concrete. Water seeped through the seams of the door first, thin silver lines spreading across the tiles. Then the sound changed, a low suction, as though the earth itself were trying to drink. Laura grabbed Emma, lifting her onto the counter. "Jacob, help me move the chairs. Stack them up." Jacob didn't move. He stood staring out the window. The shapes in the mist were closer now, pressed almost against the glass. A forest of drowned faces watching silently. "Jacob!" she screamed. He turned toward her. "They want to go home." "What are you talking about?" "They live in the water now," he said softly. He showed me. They remember what it felt like to breathe. Marge began to pray aloud, voice cracking. "Our Father who art in heaven." Her words cut off with a sharp gasp. The glass shattered. A wave of dark water burst through the window, sweeping her backward. She disappeared under it in an instant. Laura grabbed Jacob's arm. "Run!" They waded through the rising water, crashing through swinging kitchen doors toward the storage room. Emma clung to her back, screaming. Behind them, the diner filled like a tank, tables and chairs rising, spinning, colliding. The neon eat sign flickered once beneath the surface, still glowing underwater, then went dark. They pushed through to the back hallway. A single emergency light glowed red above the exit, casting the corridor in a blood-like haze. Laura shoved against the door. It didn't move. "The pressure outside was too strong. Jacob, help me!" He stepped beside her, but instead of pushing, he pressed his ear to the door. "He's right there," he whispered. "He says if you open it, we can all be together." "Jacob, stop, please." Emma clutched her mother's neck. "Mommy, what's wrong with him?" Laura turned back to the door and shoved with all her weight. Something gave, wood splintering, metal tearing free. Water exploded through the gap, throwing them backward into the hallway. The lights went out. When Laura opened her eyes, she was floating. Everything was muffled. A deep underwater silence broken only by her heartbeat. Through the murky light, she could see Emma clinging to her shirt, eyes wide with terror. Jacob floated a few feet away, perfectly still. Then his eyes opened. For a moment she saw her son, frightened, confused. Then something else looked out through those eyes. Calm, ancient, heavy. "You should have stayed by the river," it said in Mark's voice. Though Jacob's lips barely moved, Laura shook her head, bubbles escaping her mouth. "No, you ran when I called you. I was waiting in the dark." The water around them began to churn. Through it she saw shapes moving. The drowned figures from the woods, hundreds of them, drifting closer in a slow spiral. Their mouths opened and closed without sound. A current formed, pulling her toward the center. "Mark!" She tried to scream, though only air rose. "Please let them go." Jacob drifted closer, his hand reaching out. "He says you don't understand. The river remembers everything it takes. It keeps what it loves." She grabbed him, shaking him hard. "You're my son." He smiled faintly. "Then come with us." A light flared behind him, dim at first, then brightening to a pale, pulsing glow. The current pulled harder. Laura clutched Emma to her chest, kicking upward, desperate for air. She broke the surface with a gasp. The diner was gone. Only its roof remained visible above the dark, rolling water. The woods were half submerged. The power lines hummed just inches above the flood. Rain still fell, but it was quieter now, almost gentle. "Mom!" Emma screamed, pointing. Something was rising from the water. A figure, tall, heavy, made of silt and shadow. Mark's face flickered through it like a reflection on glass. He spoke without sound, but the words formed in her head. "You promised you'd never leave me. Please," she whispered, tears mixing with rain. "You're not him." The figure reached out. Its hand brushed her arm and her skin burned again, blistering where it touched. She screamed, pushing Emma onto the edge of the roof. "Climb, go!" Emma hesitated, crying. "Mom, go!" The current surged again and Laura was pulled under. Cold darkness swallowed her whole. She opened her eyes underwater. The glow was back, brighter this time, spreading through the depths like dawn. Around her, the drowned shapes moved gracefully, no longer menacing, just drifting, eyes closed. Mark stood among them, arms open. "It's quiet here," he said, voice echoing in her head. "No more pain, no more loss." Laura floated closer, exhausted. "I can't," he smiled faintly. "You already have." His hand touched her cheek. And for an instant, she saw everything. The river winding back through the forest. Through the years, collecting lost things, forgotten things, making them part of itself. Then the light went out. Morning broke again over the valley. Rescue choppers circled above the flooded town. The water had already begun to recede. The diner was half buried in silt. A rescuer leaned from the helicopter shouting, "We've got movement on the roof." A small girl sat there, shivering under a silver blanket, clutching a soaked, mud-streaked doll that looked eerily handmade, its glass eyes black and still. The rescuer smiled. "It's okay, sweetheart. We've got you." The girl looked up. Her lips moved, but her voice was almost a whisper, carried away by the wind. She's still down there. 3 days after the flood, the valley smelled of rust and rot. Helicopters came and went, dropping off supplies and ferrying survivors to the high school gymnasium that now served as a relief center. The building buzzed with the low hum of generators and the murmured prayers of people who still hadn't found everyone they'd lost. Emma sat on a cot near the far wall, wrapped in a blanket too big for her small shoulders. A FEMA volunteer crouched beside her, offering a paper cup of cocoa. "Do you have anyone we can call?" he asked softly. Emma shook her head. "Mom's coming soon?" The man glanced down at his clipboard, uncertain how to answer. Across the room, a woman from the sheriff's office approached. Her badge read, Deputy Kay Halverson, the younger sister of the man who'd gone missing during the storm. Her face was drawn, eyes hollow from sleepless nights. She knelt beside Emma. "Sweetheart, can you tell me what happened out there?" "How did you get to the roof?" Emma's gaze stayed fixed on the floor. "The water put me there." "The water?" Emma nodded slowly. "It lifted me up, like hands." The deputy hesitated, glancing toward the other volunteers. "And your mom?" Emma didn't answer. She only looked down at the doll she held, a rough, waterlogged thing with black glass eyes. Its head was tilted slightly to the side, as if listening. "She said she wouldn't leave me," Emma whispered. She said she'd be right behind me. That night, the rain began again, not heavy this time, just a soft drizzle that slicked the cracked pavement and filled the silence. Emma lay awake on her cot. The shelter lights buzzed faintly overhead. Somewhere in the corner, a generator coughed. She rolled onto her side. The doll lay next to her, eyes catching the light like tiny mirrors. "I can't sleep," she whispered to it. The doll's head turned, just slightly, but enough. Emma froze. Water began to pool beneath the cot, spreading in thin lines across the floor. A low hum filled the air, like the vibration of distant thunder. "Mom?" she whispered. Something rippled inside the water, a reflection forming beneath the surface, faint and shimmering. Her mother's face appeared there, pale and serene, hair floating like river grass. "Emma," the reflection said without sound. Emma reached toward it. The surface rippled again, and for an instant she felt the same burning sting that had scarred her mother's hands. She gasped and pulled back. The reflection vanished. The doll's head straightened, eyes now fixed on the ceiling. By morning, the floodwaters had drained almost completely from the valley. Reporters arrived. Drones buzzed overhead, recording the devastation for the evening news. Deputy Halverson drove back toward the diner site. The road was still slick with mud, the air thick with insects. What had once been the diner was now a hollow shell. Its roof caved in, its sign tangled in a tree half a mile downriver. Halverson climbed out of her truck and picked her way across the debris. Near the edge of the collapsed structure, she found a small patch of fabric caught on a branch, a torn piece of a blue jacket. She froze. The name tag still clung to it, half burned away but legible enough to read Laura Maynard. Her breath hitched. Jesus! The river beside her was still, flat as glass, but every few seconds bubbles rose to the surface, small, steady, rhythmic. As she leaned closer, she thought she heard a voice, soft, wet, whispering beneath the surface. Her own name. Karen. She stumbled backward, heart hammering. The voice came again, clearer this time. "Karen, help me!" It was her brother's voice. The water moved differently now, swirling in a perfect circle at her feet. Something glimmered in the depths, metal maybe, or a reflection. She backed away slowly. When she reached her truck, she slammed the door shut and gunned the engine. But even over the roar of the tires, she swore she could still hear it, her brother's voice following her all the way back up the hill. That night, Emma was moved to a foster home in town, an older couple with kind eyes and a tidy little house by the woods. They gave her warm clothes, a bed of her own, and a nightlight shaped like a star. She thanked them politely, clutching the doll tight against her chest. When they left her alone, she turned it over in her hands. Its stitching was coming loose at the seams, exposing damp fabric beneath. Something shimmered there, faintly pulsing like a heartbeat. "Mom?" she whispered. The light flickered. From somewhere far below, deeper than the house, deeper than the earth, came a sound like rushing water, and then a voice. Distant but familiar. "Don't be afraid, sweetheart. It's just the river." The night was too quiet. Outside the small house, the trees were motionless, their leaves slick with dew. The flood had gone, leaving behind a strange, heavy calm. Not even the crickets sang. Inside, the old grandfather clock in the hall ticked softly. The couple who'd taken Emma in slept behind a closed door. Only the child was awake, sitting upright in bed with the doll cradled in her lap. Rainwater dripped somewhere inside the walls, steady and rhythmic. Emma turned toward the window. The glass was fogged, but behind it she could see movement, small ripples of shadow across the pane like reflections from a stream. She whispered, "Mom?" The doll twitched once, then the whisper came again, this time not from the river but from the ceiling above. "Emma." She looked up. Water stains bled across the plaster, spreading like veins. One droplet formed, hung for a second, and fell, landing squarely on the doll's face. The eyes blinked. Emma dropped it with a gasp. The doll hit the floor and sat upright on its own, head turning slowly toward her. Its mouth, once stitched shut, was now a small black hole, as if the threads had been dissolved. The house creaked. Emma backed against the headboard. "Mom?" she whispered again. "You said you'd come back." The doll's head tilted. From its mouth came a faint, gurgling voice, the same voice that had called from the river. "I did." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "You're not her." The doll stood. Its tiny hands flexed as if remembering how to move. Water began to pool around its feet, spreading across the carpet. The sound returned, low, rolling, like distant thunder. "You left me," the voice said. "You let the river take me." Emma shook her head. "I didn't." "You told me to climb?" The doll smiled, just barely. "And I did." Down the hall, the foster father stirred in his sleep. His wife beside him whispered something about rain. Then both of them sat up at the same time. A sound came from the hallway, a soft sloshing, like someone walking barefoot through puddles. He frowned, swinging his legs over the bed. "Emma?" No answer. He grabbed his flashlight and opened the door. The beam cut through a thin mist filling the hall. Water trickled down the wallpaper, dripping into the carpet. "Emma?" he called again. Something moved at the far end of the corridor, a small figure standing in the dim light of the child's room. He stepped closer. The air grew colder, the smell of river silt thick enough to taste. "Sweetheart, are you okay?" The figure turned its head. The beam caught its face, porcelain, wet, mouth black and open. The flashlight hit the floor with a dull thud. His wife screamed. The next morning, rescue workers arrived after the neighbors reported strange noises and flooding from inside the house. They found the couple in their bedroom, unconscious but alive, the floor soaked ankle deep. The little girl's bed was empty. Only a trail of water led out through the open front door, across the porch and into the woods beyond. A mile away, near the river's new edge, they found the doll. It was sitting upright on a rock, perfectly dry despite the mist, facing the water as if waiting. When one of the workers tried to pick it up, it broke apart in his hands. Inside, instead of stuffing, there was hair, real hair, and a single small bone. They bagged it as evidence. Later that day, a volunteer spotted footprints, bare, small, leading away from the river. They ended halfway up the hill, where the soil was dry. After that, nothing. A week passed. The town began to rebuild. The newspapers moved on. But at night, when the rain returned, the river made a new sound, a soft whisper that rose and fell with the current. Sometimes it sounded like a woman calling a name. Sometimes it sounded like a child answering. And every so often, when the moon hung low and silver, people walking near the valley swore they saw two figures standing by the water's edge. One tall, one small, holding hands. Neither of them cast a reflection. The river flowed quietly around their feet, and the air smelled like rain and old dreams. Then, as suddenly as they appeared, they were gone, leaving behind only the stillness and the sound of the water breathing. The woods behind the Miller farmhouse had always been alive. Even in winter, when the snow lay thick and the world felt still, you could hear them whisper, branches brushing together like breath through teeth. Hannah Miller grew up pretending not to notice. By the time she was 17, she'd learned to ignore the small noises, the faint thumps against her window at night, the way the shadows shifted along the tree line even when the wind wasn't moving. It was her little sister, Lily, who never could. "Do you hear them?" Lily would ask. "The hollow ones," she'd whisper, eyes wide. "They talk when the moon's out." Hannah always laughed, but never looked outside when Lily said that, because sometimes, when the house went quiet, she did hear them. It was late October, the last night anyone saw Lily Miller. The girl's mother, Sarah, was working the late shift at the diner off Route 9. Their father had been gone since summer, one of those slow, unfinished exits that nobody in town wanted to mention. Hannah sat on the porch steps, hoodie pulled tight, phone glowing in her hand. The air smelled like rain and pine needles. "Lily, it's dark," she called toward the edge of the trees. "Come inside." Her sister's voice floated back through the mist. "Just a minute." "Now!" Hannah yelled, trying not to sound scared. "Mom will kill us if you're out there." No answer. The wood swallowed sound like water. After a few seconds, she heard it again. Not Lily this time, but something else. A low humming, like a voice caught between laughter and breathing. She stood, flashlight cutting through the fog. "Lily?" The beam found nothing but mist and the pale shapes of birch trunks. Then, something moved. A flicker of white fabric deeper in the woods. "Lily, don't play around," Hannah muttered, stepping off the porch. The boards creaked beneath her weight. "I'm serious." The flashlight's beam quivered, and then she heard it, Lily's giggle, faint, almost behind her. Hannah turned fast. "Lily?" No one there, just the whisper of pine needles brushing against each other. By the time their mother came home at midnight, Hannah was pacing the kitchen. "Where's your sister?" Sarah asked, setting down her keys. Hannah's voice cracked. "She went into the woods." Sarah blinked, still in her grease-stained uniform. "What?" She said she'd be a minute. I told her to come back and she didn't." Her mother froze, hand halfway to the phone. "Did you look for her?" I went as far as the creek," Hannah said. Then I heard something, like... She stopped, like someone else. Sarah dialed 911. Her hands were shaking. By morning, the woods were filled with searchlights and dogs. Deputy Cole Whitaker found the first sign, Lily's red rain boot, half buried in the mud by the creek bed. "It's fresh," he said quietly, crouching down. "Tracks lead east, but they fade fast." Sarah stood a few feet away, wrapped in a blanket. Hannah beside her, pale, lips bitten raw. "Could she have gotten lost?" Sarah asked. Cole hesitated. "Maybe, but both of them knew these woods. They'd lived here their whole lives. Getting lost wasn't easy, not unless you wanted to." By the third day, the search ended. The town moved on the way small towns always do, with casseroles and whispered prayers, and a quiet agreement not to talk about the parts that didn't make sense, like the way the dogs refused to cross the creek, or the fact that every searchlight shorted out after midnight, one by one, until the woods were black again. Hannah stayed home from school. The farmhouse felt empty, but not quiet. Never quiet. Sometimes she'd wake in the night and hear footsteps in the hall. Other times just breathing. Once around 3 a.m., she swore she heard her sister whisper her name. She got up, heart hammering, and followed the sound into the living room. The air was colder there. The curtains moved even though the windows were shut. The whisper came again, from inside the wall behind the couch. "Hannah." She froze. "Lily." A faint scratching answered. Not random, steady, like fingernails tracing letters. She leaned closer. "What are you doing?" The scratching stopped. Then, a faint, muffled voice. Cold. Hannah stumbled backward, hitting the coffee table. The lamp flickered, then went dark. She stood there, breathing hard, staring at the wall. When she finally turned away, she noticed something else. A wet footprint on the floorboards. Small, bare. It led toward her bedroom. The next morning, Hannah told her mother. Sarah's face went pale. Don't start with that. I'm not making it up, Hannah insisted. I heard her. Right here. She's gone, Sarah snapped, voice shaking. You think I don't want her back? But this isn't helping. Hannah looked down. She's not gone. Her mother's eyes filled with tears. Baby, sometimes bad things happen and we don't get to know why. But Hannah wasn't listening anymore. She could still hear it. Faint, steady, somewhere beneath the floor. Not crying, knocking. That night, Hannah didn't sleep. She sat by the wall with her phone flashlight on, recording. For hours, nothing happened. Just the soft hum of wind outside. Then at 2:13 a.m. the sound began again. 3 knocks. A pause. 2 more. Then her name. Hannah. The voice was small, distant, muffled through wood and plaster, but it was Lily's. She pressed her palm against the wall. Where are you? Silence. Then, behind. Her flashlight flickered. She turned slowly toward the window. There, through the glass, stood a figure in the yard. Small, barefoot, wearing a red raincoat, soaked and dripping. Lily. The girl raised her hand, pressing it against the window pane from outside. Her eyes were wrong. Too dark, too still. Hannah's throat went dry. Lily? The girl smiled faintly, and then the light died. The police called it grief. That's what they told Sarah when she called again about the noises. Old houses do that, Deputy Whitaker said gently over the phone. Especially when the weather changes. They creak, they shift. But Hannah knew the difference between a creak and a whisper. The farmhouse had started to sound like a body. Sighing, groaning, breathing through its wooden ribs. Sometimes she could swear she felt the walls move when she leaned against them, like something pulsing underneath. Her mother barely spoke anymore. She'd stopped going to work, just sat in the kitchen with a mug of coffee she never drank, staring out toward the woods. They hadn't gone near the creek since the search ended. Neither of them could. On the 3rd night after seeing Lily's face in the window, Hannah set her phone by the wall again and hit record. The air in her room felt damp. The floorboards cold beneath her bare feet. She whispered, Lily, are you there? Silence. Then, a faint scraping sound. Her phone's microphone caught it, steady and rhythmic, like something dragging fingernails across wood. Lily? The sound stopped, and then the voice came, whisper thin, like it was speaking through cloth. You shouldn't have followed me. Hannah's stomach twisted. She looked around, flashlight beam trembling over the walls. Where are you? No answer. But when she turned toward her closet, she noticed something new. A crack along the plaster near the baseboard. Small, jagged, wet-looking, she crouched. The air coming from the gap was cold, and then something shifted inside. Just a slight movement, like breath pushing out from the wall. She stumbled back, heart pounding, and ran for her mother's room. Sarah woke up to Hannah shaking her. It's her! She's in the walls! Her mother sat up, hair tangled, eyes hollow. Hannah, stop! She spoke to me. Enough! Sarah's voice cracked like glass. I can't keep doing this. Hannah froze. Sarah covered her face with her hands. You're seeing things, hearing things. We need to maybe go stay with your aunt. Get away from this house. You think it's the house? Hannah whispered. Her mother didn't answer. But later, when Hannah went back to her room, the crack in the wall had grown. By morning, the house smelled like river water. It was faint at first, like damp leaves and iron. But soon, it was everywhere. In the kitchen, the hallway, even in Sarah's clothes. She tried to scrub it away, but no matter how hard she cleaned, the scent came back. Hannah stood at the sink, staring at her reflection in the window. It's her, she murmured. Sarah snapped. Stop saying that. She's trying to come home. Her mother's hand slammed against the counter. "That's not your sister." The words hung in the air. Neither of them spoke after that. That night, Hannah woke to the sound of running water. It wasn't raining. She got up and followed it down the hall, the floor cold under her feet. The sound led her to the basement door. Water was trickling beneath it. She opened the door slowly. The smell hit her first. Rot, mold, and something metallic. The basement steps glistened with moisture. "Mom?" She called softly. No answer. She took one cautious step down. The wooden boards creaked. At the bottom, ankle deep in dark water, something moved. Her flashlight beam flickered across the surface and caught a small red shape floating there. A rain boot. She stared at it for a long time, her breath shaking. Then, from the darkness beyond the beam, came a splash. She aimed the light toward it. A pale hand broke the water's surface. Small, thin, fingers outstretched. "Lily." The hand disappeared beneath the ripples, and then, faintly, the voice came again. "You're not supposed to open the door." The basement light burst out with a pop. When Hannah came to, she was lying on the couch. Morning light streamed through the windows. Her mother was sitting nearby, silent, her eyes red. "What happened?" Hannah croaked. "You fell," Sarah said flatly. "The basement flooded overnight. You must have slipped." Hannah tried to sit up. The boot?" Her mother's voice hardened. "There's nothing down there." But when Hannah looked at her mother's hands, she saw scratches, long, fresh cuts across her palms. That evening, the house grew colder again. Hannah noticed the photos on the living room wall. Family pictures, school portraits, were crooked. Some had slipped entirely, lying face down on the floor. She knelt to pick one up. It was Lily's fourth-grade photo. Gap-toothed smile, hair tied in braids. But when she turned the frame upright, the glass was fogged from inside. A thin smear of condensation trailing down the image like tears. She touched it. The glass was wet, and beneath the picture, faint words were scrawled into the paint of the wall. "Let me out." At 1:42 a.m., Hannah woke to the sound of footsteps again. They came from the hallway, slow, careful. She held her breath as they stopped outside her door. The knob turned. The door creaked open, and for a second she thought it was her mother. But the shape that stood there was smaller, barely 5 feet tall, wet hair hanging in ropes, skin pale and glistening like it had been pulled from water. "Lily," Hannah whispered. The figure tilted its head. "It's cold," it said softly, voice like water through pipes. "It's dark in there." Hannah sat up. "Where?" The thing smiled faintly. "Behind you." She turned. The wall was moving, swelling outward, the wallpaper bubbling like it was breathing. A dark liquid seeped from the crack near the baseboard. When she turned back, the figure was gone. Only the wet footprints remained, leading back toward the hall. At dawn, Sarah found her daughter sitting in the living room, staring at the wall. "Did you sleep?" she asked. Hannah didn't answer. Sarah followed her gaze to the same wall where she'd heard noises before. Something had changed. The paint was peeling and faint outlines showed through beneath. Shapes, handprints, faces pressed from the other side. Sarah's breath caught. What is that?" Hannah's voice was small. "She's not alone." That night Sarah tried to leave. She packed a bag, grabbed her keys. "Come on," she said. "We're going to your aunt's." Hannah didn't move. "If we leave her here, she'll die." Sarah's hands trembled. "Sweetheart, she already..." The lights flickered. The air grew heavy, and from inside the walls, 100 voices began whispering at once. Some high, some low, all overlapping. "Help us, it's cold, don't go, stay, stay, stay." Sarah dropped her keys. The floorboards beneath them shuddered. The house groaned like something vast was shifting underneath. And in the corner, near the baseboard, the crack split open. wide enough to see what lay inside. For one heartbeat, Hannah saw movement, not just one face, but dozens, pale and sunken, pressing against the wood from beneath, eyes staring, mouths open, whispering in the dark. The walls were full of them. The following morning, the woods were still. No birds, no wind, just a heavy waiting silence that clung to the farmhouse like fog. Sarah didn't speak much after what she saw in the wall. She barely moved, just sat at the kitchen table, eyes red, whispering prayers that didn't sound like any Hannah had ever heard before. When the sun rose, the light looked wrong, pale and watery, like it had been filtered through glass. Hannah stared out the window at the yard. The grass was slick with dew, though it hadn't rained in days. The ground seemed darker too, soaked through with something thick and black near the tree line. "Mom," she said quietly, "we need to leave." Sarah didn't answer. She was staring at the floor. "Mom," Sarah looked up finally, her voice trembling. "If we go, they'll follow. Who?" Her mother's eyes flicked toward the walls. "The ones she let in." Hannah's phone buzzed on the counter, a number she didn't recognize. She answered, hoping maybe it was Deputy Whitaker, but when she lifted the phone to her ear, she didn't hear a voice. She heard water, flowing, steady, like the creek behind their house. Then a faint whisper, "You're not supposed to open the door." She froze. "Lily!" The call ended. The phone screen stayed wet where she held it. A thin smear of mud streaked across the glass. That night, Sarah locked every door and window, shoved furniture against the basement door, and told Hannah to stay in her room no matter what she heard. Outside, the woods were alive again, branches shifting, faint voices rising and falling like the wind itself was whispering names. Hannah lay awake, listening. Around midnight, she heard it, soft footsteps upstairs. Then the sound of her mother's voice, muffled, pleading. "Please, I can't. I already gave you her." A pause, a sound like breathing, deep and heavy. Then, "You owe us more." Hannah bolted upright. "Mom?" No response. She grabbed her flashlight and stepped into the hall. The air smelled like wet earth. When she reached her mother's room, the door was wide open. The sheets were soaked, dripping onto the floor. The window was open too, curtains fluttering like pale hands. But Sarah was gone. Only the faintest sound remained, a slow, rhythmic knocking from inside the wall. The next day, no one answered when Hannah tried calling for help. The phone line was dead. Her car wouldn't start. By afternoon, the smell of rot had grown unbearable. She covered her nose with a towel and tried to open the front door, but it wouldn't move. The hinges were sealed over with something dark, resin or sap, that oozed from the frame. She was trapped. The house was breathing heavier now, every creak and sigh a heartbeat. When she walked, the floorboards flexed under her feet, damp and spongy. By dusk, Hannah started tearing down the wallpaper in the living room. She didn't know why. Maybe instinct, maybe madness, but she needed to see what was underneath. The first strip came away easily. The wall behind it wasn't plaster. It was wood, old, splintered, and covered in carved symbols, hundreds of them. Circles, eyes, spirals, and something that looked like a mouth. In the center was a phrase scratched deep into the wood. "We are still hungry." She backed away, trembling. Behind her, the floor moaned. She turned and saw the hallway stretching long, longer than it should have been, like the house had grown overnight. At the far end stood a small figure in a red raincoat. Lily, her skin was gray now, lips blue, eyes black as the spaces between stars. "Come with me," the little girl said softly. "Mom's waiting." Hannah shook her head. "You're not her." The girl tilted her head, water dripping from her hair onto the floor. "She's in the hollow," she said. "You have to see." Then she smiled, a soft, broken smile that made Hannah's stomach turn. "Please," the girl whispered. "Don't make me go back alone." Hannah followed. The hall seemed to stretch forever. The walls pulsed with a slow rhythm, every few steps exhaling mist into the air. When she reached the end, the girl turned and pointed at the basement door. It was open. Cold air poured out, carrying the smell of the creek. "Down there," the voice said. Hannah hesitated. "What's down there?" The girl's expression didn't change. "Where we belong." Then she stepped backward into the dark, vanishing like mist. The stairs groaned under Hannah's feet as she descended. The beam of her flashlight wavered over the walls, all slick with moisture, covered in the same carved symbols as the living room. The water was higher now, rippling around her ankles. "Mom?" she whispered. A faint voice answered, trembling, wet. "Don't look at them." "Mom, where are you?" The water rippled again, and from the far corner a pale shape rose, her mother, drenched, eyes wide and glassy. "Mom!" But as she stepped forward, something moved behind Sarah. Tall, thin shapes, dozens of them, rising from the water like shadows pulled free of the ground. They had no faces, only hollow depressions where eyes should be. Their bodies shimmered like the surface of the river, translucent and dripping. Sarah whispered, "They took her," and she brought them back. The shapes turned toward Hannah, heads tilting in perfect unison. One of them spoke, the sound like bubbles bursting beneath water. "The hollow remembers." Hannah stumbled backward, slipping on the wet step. Her flashlight hit the water and went dark, hands cold. Soft, slick, reached for her legs, her arms, her throat. Then she heard Lily's voice close to her ear. "If you open the door, you have to take something out." When Hannah woke, she was lying on the basement floor. It was dry, no water, no shadows, no mother, just the faint humming of the house and the scent of pine. She stood dizzy and looked around. The symbols were still there, burned into the wood, but where her mother had stood there was only a small pile of clothes, soaked, muddy, and cold. Hannah dropped to her knees. "Mom." Something shifted behind her. A whisper. "We're still here." The walls began to breathe again. By the next morning, the house was silent. The air felt thin, stretched. Hannah walked through each room, the kitchen, the living room, her mother's empty bed. When she reached the hallway, she noticed something new carved into the floorboards. Letters, a message. "Thank you for opening the door." She stood there a long time, staring at it. Then she heard her mother's voice from the kitchen, soft, calling her name. She smiled faintly, tears in her eyes, and turned toward the sound. But when she entered the kitchen, no one was there, only the wall, and cracked open again, wet and breathing, and from inside it, faintly, came the sound of 100 voices whispering her name. The Miller farmhouse stood alone on County Road 19, quiet as the fields around it turned to frost. A week had passed since anyone had seen Hannah Miller. The sheriff's office filed the report as missing, presumed runaway. The neighbors whispered other things. That she'd followed her sister into the woods, or that she'd been taken by whatever was still in those trees. The truth was quieter than that. It lived in the walls. 1 week earlier, the morning after the house went still, the first snow fell. It came early that year, thick and heavy, blanketing the fields and muting every sound. The farmhouse looked peaceful from the outside, the kind of place you might mistake for safe. Inside, Hannah sat at the kitchen table, staring at the marks carved into the floor. The words were still there. "Thank you for opening the door." She'd tried to scrub them out, but the letters were burned deep into the wood. The house was cold. The furnace had died sometime in the night, but she didn't feel the chill anymore. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. Her reflection in the window was thin, hollow-eyed. almost transparent when the light hit it just right. Sometimes she thought she could see movement in the glass behind her, a flicker of someone small. Wearing red, she never turned to look. By afternoon, Hannah walked the edge of the woods, snow crunching under her boots. The creek was frozen over now, the water beneath it silent and black. Somewhere beneath that ice, she knew her sister was still there, or what was left of her. She crouched by the water's edge and whispered, "I didn't mean to open it." The trees said nothing. Only the faint moan of wind through their branches answered. Still she waited. She always did, and sometimes when the wind shifted, she could swear she heard it again. The smallest voice, carried through the cold. You can't close what's already open. That night, a car pulled into the driveway. Deputy Whitaker's cruiser. He'd come to check the property after no one answered calls. The headlights cut through the mist, glinting off frost-covered windows. He stepped out, boots crunching in the snow, and knocked on the door. No answer. He called out, "Hannah?" "Mrs. Miller." Nothing. He tried the handle. The door opened easily. Inside, the air was damp and cold. Dust floated in the light from his flashlight. "Anyone home?" The beam moved over the kitchen table, the cold stove, the floor. He stopped. The words carved into the boards glistened faintly under the light, as if the wood was still wet. "Thank you for opening the door." He crouched down, running a gloved hand over the grooves. The texture was strange, almost soft, like skin beneath the surface. He shuddered and stood, sweeping the flashlight across the room again. Then he heard it. A faint knock, from inside the wall, 3 times. Slow, measured. He froze. "Hannah?" The knock came again, softer this time, higher, like small hands tapping. He followed the sound to the living room. The wallpaper there was torn away, exposing old wood scarred with circles and eyes. The air smelled faintly of river water. He pressed his ear to the wall. Silence. Then, very faintly, someone whispered, "Help me." Outside, the snow thickened. By the time Whitaker stepped back onto the porch, his breath was shaking. He called it in as possible squatters, abandoned residents. He didn't mention the voice. As he turned to leave, he looked back once. In the upstairs window, behind the frost, he thought he saw someone watching him. A girl, maybe 17, standing still in the pale light. Her face was unreadable. He lifted his flashlight, but by the time the beam hit the glass, she was gone. 2 days later, the sheriff's department sealed the farmhouse. "Unsafe foundation," the report said. But the locals still avoid County Road 19. They say that on cold nights, if you stop your car by the creek and roll the window down, you can hear it, a soft knocking from somewhere underground, followed by a child's voice whispering for help. And if you drive past the Miller farmhouse when the moon's high, you might see a girl in the window, her hand pressed to the glass, her breath fogging the pane. Sometimes she looks 17, sometimes she looks younger, and sometimes she's not there at all. Just the reflection of the woods behind you, swaying in the dark. Fog rolled off the Atlantic in slow sheets that afternoon, turning the road into a ribbon of gray. Claire Dalton followed it north, the wipers beating a lazy rhythm, the old GPS repeating "arrived at destination" long before she saw any sign of a house. When it finally appeared, it seemed to materialize out of the mist. A weather-beaten Victorian crouched on the edge of the cliffs, salt-scarred and slanting toward the sea. A crooked mailbox read Dalton in peeling blue paint. She parked beside the porch and sat for a minute, engine ticking, feeling the damp air slide through the cracked window. Her aunt's lawyer had called 2 weeks ago. "You're listed as sole heir. Property in Ashfield, Maine. Needs inspection before probate clears." She hadn't been back here since she was 9. The door groaned open as if exhaling the years. Inside smelled of wood rot, dust, and something faintly metallic like rusted coins. Everything was covered in white sheets. Everything except the mirrors. There were dozens of them, one on every wall, nailed tight at each corner. Different shapes and eras, gilt frames, cheap motel glass, one that looked like it came from a church. They faced inward, reflecting each other until the dim hallway seemed to stretch forever in both directions. Claire caught her own reflection as she moved, pale, hair damp from the mist, eyes ringed with the kind of tiredness that never quite leaves. She whispered to herself, "It's just a house," and started upstairs. The second floor was worse. Wallpaper bubbled from damp. The ceiling bowed under years of salt air. And still, every room watched her. In the master bedroom, a tall standing mirror leaned against the far wall. A note was taped to its frame in faded handwriting she recognized at once. Aunt Marian's, "Do not cover them. Do not move them. Do not look for long." Claire frowned. The tape was brittle, the ink water-stained. She tore the note free, muttering, "Paranoid, same as always," and pulled the sheet off the bed. Dust erupted like smoke. When it cleared, she saw herself in the mirror again. Only, for a split second, her reflection didn't move with her. She blinked hard, heart skipping. The image settled, copying her exactly now. Probably just the light. Probably. That evening she found the fuse box and got half the house powered. One lamp in the kitchen came to life, buzzing faintly. She made tea on a camping stove, wrapped herself in a blanket, and read the old envelope the lawyer had mailed with the keys. "Dearest Claire, if you are reading this, I'm gone. The house will feel strange. It always has. I could never explain it to anyone who hadn't seen it breathe. The mirrors keep it still. Don't take them down. You'll understand eventually. Love, Marion." Claire set the letter aside, smiling despite the unease. Her aunt had been eccentric. Tarot cards, dream journals, talking about thin places where the world folded. Still, the words "keep it still" lingered like a draft under the door. The wind off the ocean rose as night came on. By midnight, the fog pressed against the windows like wet cloth. Claire wandered the halls with her phone flashlight, counting the mirrors without really meaning to. There were 42. She stopped at the end of the upstairs corridor. Here the mirrors faced each other directly, a long tunnel of infinite reflections disappearing into darkness. Her own face repeated smaller and smaller until it vanished. The air smelled faintly of rain and something else. Old perfume, maybe. When she turned to leave, she heard it. A small, quick breath behind her ear. She spun. Nothing. Just her reflection. Except, in the farthest depth of the mirror tunnel, she thought she saw another figure standing slightly apart from her reflection. Still, watching. Her phone light flickered, then went out. She woke later on the couch downstairs, unsure when she'd fallen asleep. The lamp had burned out. Only the sound of the sea filled the silence, slow waves hitting the rocks below. Then came another sound. A soft tapping, somewhere upstairs. Probably the windows, she thought, forcing herself up. The stairs creaked under her weight. The air was colder now, sharp with salt. At the top landing, the tapping stopped. She stood in the dark, listening. Then the nearest mirror shivered, a faint vibration that rattled the nail heads. Claire stepped closer, heart pounding. Her reflection stared back, blurred in the low light. She reached out and touched the glass. It was warm. From deep inside the reflection, something else tapped back. She stumbled backward, tripping against the wall. Her breath fogged the air. For a moment she thought she saw her reflection still standing with its hand pressed to the glass, long after she'd pulled away, a heartbeat late, as if delayed by distance. Then everything was still again. She laughed once, sharp and breathless, whispering, "You're just tired." Downstairs, she locked her bedroom door but left the lamp on all night. Outside, the fog thickened until the windows looked painted over, and in their faint glow the mirrors on the walls gleamed softly, like 100 open eyes waiting for her to dream. The next morning, the fog still hadn't lifted. It hung low over the cliffs like a second ocean, swallowing sound and color. Claire stood at the kitchen sink, staring at her reflection in the small square mirror nailed above the faucet. Her eyes looked sunken, ringed with sleepless gray. The reflection behind her, the hallway, was faintly darker than it should have been. She blinked, leaned closer. The reflection didn't quite line up. In the glass, the hallway lights were dimmer, like another version of the same house caught in perpetual dusk. She shut her eyes, breathed out, and turned away. There was work to do. The day passed in small chores, clearing cobwebs, opening cabinets, trying not to look too long at the mirrors. In the living room, she found a box of her aunt's belongings: seashells, faded photographs, a pocket diary with brittle pages. The last entry was written only 2 months before her death. Something in the glass is waking again. The house hums at night. I've nailed them all down, but it's still shifting. I hear breathing in the walls. Claire frowned. She flipped to the previous entry. Never take the mirrors down. Never look when it calls. She shut the diary. Jesus, Marion. The old woman had been living alone for 15 years out here, half blind, with no electricity half the time. Delirium could make anyone see things. Still, the thought of her aunt sitting in this same room, writing those words while surrounded by glass, made the back of her neck prickle. Around noon, she found the first photograph that didn't make sense. It was a Polaroid stuck between 2 books on a shelf. It showed the living room. Same furniture, same curtains. But where the walls should have been, there was only mirror. Endless mirrors reflecting each other into blackness. And in the center of the photo, standing barefoot on the rug, was a woman who looked exactly like Claire. Same posture, same hair. Only her eyes were wrong. Completely black, like 2 holes burned through the print. Claire dropped the photo. It fluttered face down onto the floor. When she picked it up again, the image was gone. Just a blank square of white. That night, she tried to sleep in the upstairs bedroom again, but the tapping returned. This time it wasn't random. It came in sets of 3, deliberate and slow, like a code. She sat up, listening. The sound moved along the wall, then stopped beside the mirror at the foot of her bed. Claire whispered, "Who's there?" Silence. Then, so faint she almost missed it, a voice answered, like breath sliding across glass. "Help me." She froze. The air turned cold enough to sting. Her throat tightened. "Who are you?" Nothing. Just the echo of her own voice. But when she looked closer, her reflection was wrong again. It sat perfectly still while she trembled, its lips parted as if whispering something she couldn't hear. She grabbed the blanket, covered the mirror, and turned on every light in the room. The following morning, she tore the sheet off again. The glass was spotless. No smudge, no condensation. But her reflection's expression, for the briefest instant, was smiling. She stepped back so fast she hit the dresser. "No," she said aloud. "No, you're not doing this. You're exhausted." She decided to call someone, anyone, to break the silence. No signal. The landline was dead too. She checked the wiring and found it cut cleanly in the basement. The air down there smelled of mold and salt. Old seawater stains streaked the walls, and she noticed something new. Dozens of tiny perfect circles scratched into the concrete near the fuse box, arranged like eyes. She didn't remember them being there before. By late afternoon, the fog began seeping into the house through unseen cracks curling along the floorboards. The mirrors fogged from the inside, blurring her reflection into pale shapes. Claire found herself talking aloud just to hear a human voice. "You're fine. You're safe. It's just condensation." Somewhere behind her, something whispered. The same words back. Exactly the same voice, only half a second late. She turned. Every mirror in the hallway showed her, and something standing just behind her shoulder. Tall, unfocused. Its face stretched long and gray, like wet paper pulled too thin, and when she spun around, nothing. The mirrors were empty again. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her pulse hammering under the skin. "Marion," she whispered, "what did you do to this place?" That night, she dreamed she was walking through the house with no lights on. The mirrors glowed faintly, as if lit from inside. In each one, her reflection lagged behind, turning its head a little slower, smiling a little wider. When she reached the end of the hallway, there was no reflection at all. Just darkness, and from inside it, a pale hand reached out, pressing, flat against the glass, leaving behind a smear like breath. She woke screaming, the lamp flickering, her breath fogging the air though the heater still ran. She didn't leave the next morning. She should have. She told herself she would. But something about the house felt alive now, expectant. Each mirror seemed to hum faintly when she passed, a low vibration she could feel in her teeth. The longer she stayed, the harder it became to look away. At dusk, she caught her reflection blinking when she didn't. It tilted its head, as if listening. Then it mouthed a word. Claire couldn't hear it, but she knew what it said. Stay. That evening, she found another note, one she didn't remember seeing before. It was taped to the inside of the kitchen cabinet, written in that same faded ink. If you see yourself smile first, run. The edges of the paper were damp as if freshly written. She stood there shaking, staring at her faint reflection in the metal sink. It smiled. By the third morning, the fog never lifted. It pressed against the windows like something alive, gray and unbroken, swallowing the sound of the ocean entirely. The world beyond the house didn't seem to exist anymore. Claire hadn't slept. She'd stopped checking her phone. The battery was dead and the charger didn't work. Time had dissolved into an endless, dim cycle of light and shadow that never quite changed. The mirrors hummed softly now. She could hear it at night, a low vibration that moved through the walls like a pulse. She caught herself whispering to them sometimes. Not words exactly, or more like responses, as if something just beyond the glass was speaking first. At noon, she decided to take one down. She started with the smallest mirror in the upstairs hallway, a cheap square with rusted corners nailed into the plaster. She pried one nail loose with the back of a hammer. The sound echoed through the house like a heartbeat. When she pulled the second, the light in the hallway dimmed. The glass rippled faintly, as if it were liquid. Her reflection blurred, then split. Two faces flickering over each other like a bad transmission. "Stop it," she whispered, voice trembling. "It's just metal stress, it's..." The final nail popped free. The mirror fell forward and shattered on the floor. Behind it, instead of wall, was another surface of glass. Perfectly smooth, seamless. She touched it. It was cold at first. Then, slowly, it grew warm under her fingers, pulsing like skin. And from the other side, something pressed back. She stumbled away, heart pounding. Her mind screamed for logic. Double glass? Maybe a mounted frame? Reflection from another panel. But then she saw her reflection. It wasn't moving. It stood perfectly still in the glass wall, eyes locked on hers, lips slightly parted. She whispered, "Who are you?" The reflection smiled, slow, deliberate, wrong. Then it lifted its hand and touched the inside of the mirror, exactly where she'd touched it before. Except this time, the glass gave way. A faint ripple spread across its surface, and the reflection's hand came through. Pale, wet, trembling. Claire screamed and fell backward, the hammer clattering beside her. The hand withdrew, leaving behind a faint wet print. When she looked again, the reflection was normal, copying her movements perfectly, as if nothing had happened. She spent the next hours sealing every mirror she could with sheets and duct tape. Her breathing came fast and shallow, her arms shaking. Every time she turned away from one, she swore she saw movement behind the fabric, shapes shifting, outlines pressing faintly from the other side. She called out, "Marion!" "What did you do here?" No answer. Only the faint echo of her own voice, a half-second late, like the house was thinking about replying. By nightfall, the fog began leaking through the cracks around the windows. It drifted down the hallways like smoke. Claire sat in the kitchen with the hammer still in her lap. The mirrors she hadn't covered gleamed faintly in the low light. She couldn't tell if the light was coming from her side or theirs. Then she heard it again, the tapping. But this time it wasn't from the mirrors. It came from inside the walls, steady and rhythmic, moving from one room to the next, tap, tap, tap. She followed it through the hallway, past the covered mirrors, into the narrow laundry room. The tapping stopped. Then, from behind her, a soft voice whispered, "Don't leave me here." She turned. The sheet over one of the mirrors had fallen. In the reflection, she saw herself. But the version in the glass was soaking wet, hair clinging to her face, eyes black with water, and behind that reflection stood dozens more, faint silhouettes crowding behind the glass. Pressed together, mouths open in silent screams, Claire screamed, backed into the washing machine, and threw the hammer at the mirror. The glass exploded outward, shards raining across the floor. The fog swallowed the sound. She ran. Through the halls, down the stairs, to the front door. It wouldn't open. The lock turned, but the door felt welded shut. She pounded on it, screaming for help. Outside, nothing but fog. In the reflection on the glass door, she saw herself, and behind her that wet, pale figure, standing almost close enough to touch. When she spun, the hallway was empty. The house exhaled, a deep, slow creak, as if something inside had just shifted into place. She spent the rest of the night barricaded in the kitchen, clutching the broken hammer handle, whispering, "It's not real. It's not real." But the mirrors answered. Voices rose from them like wind through empty bottles, dozens at first, then hundreds, whispering her name in a language she didn't understand. When she pressed her hands to her ears, the sound came from inside her skull. When she shut her eyes, she saw them. Faces pressed against invisible glass, all watching her. Her aunt's words came back like a curse. "The mirrors keep it still." Claire realized what she had done. She hadn't broken the curse. She'd freed it. At dawn, the fog finally thinned. Light crept across the floorboards, pale and colorless. The mirrors were silent again. The air smelled faintly of salt and something metallic. Claire walked to the nearest mirror, her legs trembling, and touched the surface. It was warm. Her reflection stared back, calm now, almost serene. And then, without her moving, it lifted a hand and wiped something from its cheek. "A tear," Claire whispered. "What are you?" Her reflection smiled faintly and whispered something back, a word she couldn't hear but could feel. "Home." Morning light seeped into the house like something reluctant to enter. It didn't look like dawn, more like a thin gray film spread over everything, flattening color, muting shadow. Claire stood in the hallway barefoot, eyes bloodshot, her hair a tangled halo. The hammer was gone. She didn't remember dropping it. The mirrors had gone still again, silent, empty. But every now and then, when she blinked, she thought she saw small movements deep inside them. Not reflections, but memories, replaying themselves in the dark. Her Aunt Marion brushing her hair in the living room mirror. A man standing by the window she didn't recognize. A young girl, herself maybe, running past, barefoot and laughing. She whispered, "These aren't reflections." And the mirrors whispered back, "No, they're what's left." In the kitchen, she found the diary again, pages warped from moisture. The final entry hadn't been there before. It looked freshly written. If the house starts showing you, it means it wants to keep you. The glass doesn't reflect. It records. Every moment ever seen in these mirrors stays here. Every person who's ever looked too long is still inside. Don't let it remember your face. Claire dropped the book like it burned. She looked up. In the nearest mirror, her reflection stayed perfectly still while she backed away. Then it whispered, "Too late." She turned to run. But the hallway wasn't the same anymore. It stretched, impossibly long, lined with mirrors that hadn't existed before. Each one showed a different version of her. Some screaming, some crying, one just standing quietly with hands clasped as if in prayer. The air was colder the farther she went. Her breath fogged the mirrors she passed. Somewhere deep in the glass, she heard voices again. Faint, overlapping. Children, women, men, all whispering over each other. Like 100 old tapes playing at once. Then one voice rose above the rest. Aunt Marion's. "Claire, don't let them touch you." Claire froze. "Marion, where are you?" "Behind. Always behind." She turned, and for the first time saw what had been following her. A shape half-formed from fog and glass. Human in outline, but hollow, its skin reflecting the room like a cracked mirror. Inside its body flickered faces, hers, Marion's, strangers, all trapped, all turning toward her as one. The house groaned, the walls pulsing like lungs. She ran. Down the stairs, past the broken mirror in the laundry room, through the front hall, all the while hearing the footsteps behind her, soft but steady. When she reached the door, it opened before she touched it. Outside, the fog waited thick and endless. She stepped through. The air changed, sharp with salt, full of gull cries. She could hear the sea again. For a moment, she thought she'd escaped. But when she turned back, the house was gone. Only an open field stretched to the cliffs, and in the distance, faintly shimmering in the fog, was her own reflection standing where the door should have been, smiling. She walked until her legs gave out. At some point she must have slept, because when she opened her eyes again, she was in a hospital room. Fluorescent lights, a heart monitor. A nurse leaned over her. "Miss Dalton, you're safe now. You were found outside Ashfield near the old cliff road." Claire tried to sit up. "The house, it's still there." The nurse frowned. "There's nothing there, sweetheart. The Dalton property burned down 20 years ago. Lightning strike. Your aunt died in that fire." Claire froze. Her voice cracked. "No, I was just there." The nurse exchanged a glance with the doctor at the door. They didn't say anything. That night, when the ward went quiet, Claire turned her head toward the small mirror above the sink. Her reflection looked tired, pale, but calm. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing slow. When she opened them again, her reflection was still watching her, but smiling, and behind it, for just a second, she saw the house again, rising out of the fog like it had never burned at all. A faint tapping came from the glass. 3 times, slow, measured. Claire's hand trembled as she reached out to touch it. The mirror was warm. Epilogue. Weeks later, a janitor cleaned the room where Claire Dalton had stayed. The bed was empty now, discharge papers signed, no forwarding address. He wiped the mirror with a rag, humming softly. When he stepped back, he frowned. There were faint fingerprints on the inside of the glass, small and perfect, as if someone had pressed both hands against it from the other side. He rubbed harder. The prints didn't fade. He shrugged and turned off the light. In the dark, the mirror reflected only the room. And in the center of that reflection, Claire stood perfectly still, smiling faintly, her hand pressed to the glass, waiting.